Todd Monken interviewed for the Buccaneers offensive coordinator job on Wednesday. I'm going to tell you what a Todd Monken offense would look like in Tampa. That and more on today's episode of Locked On Bucs.
You are Locked On Buccaneers, your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, and welcome into this episode of Locked On Bucs, your daily podcast covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the number one sports podcast network. I want to thank you for making Locked On Bucs your first listen or view every day. I am your host, James Yarcho, writer over at Bucs Report, here with you every Monday through Friday, along with the everydayers. And for that, I want to share my appreciation for your continued support of the show. I'm going to give you an offensive coordinator candidate that is still out there that nobody's really talking about that I think would be a great fit, and going to talk about a special teams coordinator that the Bucs interviewed and whether or not he would be the right fit to improve a very bad special teams unit. But the big news of the day is going to be that former Ravens offensive coordinator Todd Monken was in the building on Wednesday to interview for the Bucs offensive coordinator gig. Of course, the Bucs are familiar with Monken. He was their OC and receivers coach under Dirk Cutter back from 2016 to 2018. Monken then went on to be the offensive coordinator in Cleveland during Baker's rookie season before leaving for the offensive coordinator job in Georgia from 2020 to 2022. And then, of course, he joins the Baltimore Ravens in 2023. Monken was in the mix for the OC job in Tampa in 2023, but ultimately chose the Ravens. And honestly, it's kind of hard to blame him. Evan and I talked about it a little bit on yesterday's show, but you had a situation in Tampa that was entering the post-Brady era. No one really knew what that was going to look like. You had Baker coming in following a year where he was cut by the Carolina Panthers. He joined the Los Angeles Rams. The Bucs were a little hamstrung with the cap situation and getting out from under a lot of those void years that kept them competitive during the Brady era. So really, when you go back and look at it, it was kind of an obvious choice for Monken to join a Ravens team that had Lamar Jackson, who had already won an MVP award, but then in 2023, he wins another one under Todd Monken. He was a first-team All-Pro twice under Todd Monken, a Pro Bowler twice under Todd Monken. So that was a relatively easy choice given what Monken knew at the time of having to make that decision. Now, 3 years later, Monken has a little more information to work with. Baker threw for 40 touchdowns in 2024. The weapons are better than they were in 2023 when he had to make that decision. He knows that Bowles is going to stay out of his way. He's going to let him run things the way that he wants to run them. There won't be any meddling going on. He's probably going to get to choose his quarterback coach since Thad Lewis was let go. There might be more position coaches that he'll get to change, or at least the door is open for him to potentially change them if he so chooses. He would have 4 outstanding receivers plus a solid running back to work with. Bucky is not Derrick Henry by any stretch of the imagination, but the running back situation is good. The offensive line is great when everyone is actually healthy. So this is a really good situation to walk into if you're an offensive coordinator looking for a new job. The question is, what would a Todd Monken offense look like in Tampa? So I went back and I took a look at what he did during his time with the Ravens. So again, that was 2023, 2024, 2025. Over that 3-season span, the Ravens were first in yards per play, first in rush yards per game, and yards per rush, second in net yards per play, third in interceptions per attempt, meaning the third fewest per pass attempt, sixth in first downs per game, fifth in third down conversion rate, 10th in fourth down conversion rate, sixth in red zone efficiency, third in goal to go efficiency, third in points per game, then 21st in pass yards per game, 21st in sacks per pass attempt. Those are really the only 2 blemishes. That is an elite offensive production. Like, as a whole, that is elite. Now, you also have to factor in Lamar Jackson. He's obviously a bigger running threat than Baker is. Baker can run, but not like Lamar Jackson can. I mean, that's a quarterback that rushed for 1,000 yards on his own. So you're going to pass more and run less. That is going to drop some of those number one rush rankings down a little bit, but it's going to raise the pass rankings significantly. You're also going to see the sack numbers probably go down a little bit. Lamar ran himself into plenty of trouble, so not all of those sacks are on protection or scheme, and more so on Lamar holding the ball a little too long, trying to make too much happen. Now, of course, to be fair, Baker is going to run into those problems as well, because that's the kind of player that he is, but not at the rate that Lamar Jackson does on any given game. When you compare the Bucs over the same period of time, and yes, that is 3 different coordinators for the Bucs compared to just Todd Monken with Baltimore, they aren't that far off, but there is a big enough gap in some of these areas that if the Bucs improve on them, you're looking at being a top 5 unit in the NFL again in 2026. Yards per play, Ravens were first, Bucs were 11th. Rush yards per game, Ravens were first, Bucs were 13th. Pass yards, Ravens were 21st, Bucs were 9th. It would probably stay around there for the Bucs, but more than likely it'll actually go up. Interceptions per attempt, Ravens were 3rd, Bucs were 17th. That absolutely has to improve. And again, some of that is going to be on scheme. Some of that is going to be on Baker Mayfield himself and not trying to force the issue, not trying to force passes down the field, force things into double coverage. It's going to be on his decision-making to help bring that down a little bit. Red zone efficiency, Ravens were 6th, Bucs 14th. Goal to go, Ravens 3rd, Bucs 18th. Those are going to improve under Todd Monken. Yes, Monken had a Hall of Fame running back in Baltimore and the biggest dual threat quarterback that we've seen since Michael Vick. But do you know what he didn't have? Receivers. Like any receiver worth anything over that span. I mean, think about it. From 2023 to 2025, some of the Ravens wide receivers that they were dealing with, Devin Duvernay, Nelson Aguilar, Zay Flowers, Rashad Bateman, Laquan Treadwell, Deontay Johnson. You had a washed up Odell Beckham Jr. You had a washed up DeAndre Hopkins. That's what he was dealing with. That plays a big factor in them being 21st in pass yards per game. In Tampa, you get to bring Mike Evans back. You got Godwin, Mech, J-Mac, Tez, Cam. Those weapons are light years better than what Lamar had in Baltimore with Todd Monken calling the shots. The passing game was something that the Ravens didn't have to rely on and couldn't really rely on in those games where they were having to scratch and claw their way out of the deficit, when they were having to push the ball down the field in a hurry. They were able to rely more on Lamar's dual threat ability. They were able to rely more on Derrick Henry setting the tone, wearing down the defense, things like that. The other thing to remember about last year's Ravens, and by last year I mean 2025, were all the injuries. Lamar was hurt most of the year. He only played in 13 games. Some of those were partial games. He didn't play 13 full games throughout the season. That wasn't a good year for Lamar, and the ownership kind of used that as a reason to move on from John Harbaugh. So I think Monken is probably the Bucs' top choice in all of this because he has an extremely long track record of success. He has shown that he can maximize the talent on the roster. He can put players in the best position to succeed. He will do whatever the strength of the players is in order to move the ball and score points. He will get the absolute best out of the pieces that he has. And for those of you that want to move on from Cade Otton, you could see Monken pound the table for a guy like Isaiah Likely, who is set to become a free agent. He's very familiar with Likely. Likely is a tight end 1 in this league, but was kind of stuck having to share the time with Mark Andrews. On a team like Tampa, if he were to replace Cade Otton, he would be the unquestioned tight end 1. He would get the vast majority of the snaps. He would get the vast majority of the tight end targets. That could be a really intriguing draw for him to go to an offense that he's already familiar with while not having to share the load the way that he did with Mark Andrews. Now, I like Cade. I wouldn't mind him coming back. I expect him, honestly, to come back. But if Likely is Monken's guy, I could see the Bucs making a change there. He's going to need another running back to replace Rashad, and you'll have a lot of solid guys that are hitting the free agent market that won't break the bank and would love to be a part of Monken's offensive system in Tampa with all of those weapons and all of that potential. So this would certainly have ripple effects throughout the Bucs offseason if this is indeed who the Bucs end up getting to run the offense. But what about another name that hasn't really gotten much attention or buzz that the Buccaneers should be looking at? I throw one of those names at you coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Let's be real. No one starts a business for the joy of calculating tax withholdings or managing payroll spreadsheets. That's where Gusto comes in to take the stress out of payroll, benefits, and HR so you can focus on running your business and supporting your team. Gusto is the all-in-one remote-friendly payroll and HR platform that makes managing your team simple, transparent, and fast. Whether you're hiring, onboarding, or paying employees, Gusto helps you do it all from one place without the hassle or the hidden fees. Unlimited payroll runs for one monthly price, which means no surprise charges at the end of the month. And knowing you can reach certified HR experts anytime gives you real peace of mind. Try Gusto today at gusto.com/lockedonnfl and get 3 months free when you run your first payroll. That's right, 3 months of free payroll at gusto.com/lockedonnfl. One more time, that's gusto.com/lockedonnfl.
Hey, it's Matt Derry from the Locked On Lions podcast. The people I love depend on me. If I'm gone, the financial responsibilities don't disappear. I didn't want my family figuring things out during the hardest moment of their lives. That's why I knew only one place to go. I chose life insurance through my friends at Ethos. Ethos makes getting life insurance fast and easy, 100% online. You can get a quote in seconds, apply in minutes, and get same-day coverage. There's no medical exam. You just answer a few simple health questions. You can get up to $3 million in coverage. Some policies are as low as $30 a month. I love the folks at Ethos. Protect your family with life insurance from Ethos now by going to ethos.com/lockedonnfl. In as little as 10 minutes, you can get the free quote and up to $3 million in coverage at ethos.com/lockedonnfl. That is ethos.com/lockedonnfl. Ethos.com/lockedonnfl. Application times and rates may vary.
Thank you again for making Locked On Bucs your first listener view every day, and thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. If you haven't already, go check out the Everydayer Club. Ad-free episodes. We're working on getting that group chat up and running. There's exclusive perks. The link is in the show notes. And we now know that Mike McDaniel will interview for the Bucs offensive coordinator job on Friday. And according to more than a few media members, the general feeling around McDaniel is that he'd rather take a great OC job than a questionable head coaching job. Jobs like being the offensive coordinator in Tampa, Detroit, Philadelphia, they are going to have more appeal to him than the head coaching jobs in, say, Tennessee or Cleveland, or probably, I would guess, Arizona. There's more to work with. You can succeed immediately, and that could open better opportunities for him to return as a head coach, whether that's with the Bucs in 2027 or just a better overall situation, after finishing with a top 5 offense with a good team. The rebuilds in Cleveland and Tennessee, those are going to be a multi-year process. And those owners, those front office executives, the GMs, they're not going to have the patience. So if you're going to turn one of those teams around, it has to be like you saw with Liam Cohen in Jacksonville, like you saw with Mike Vrabel in New England. It has to be that kind of job, and I don't think those teams are set up for that. So Mike McDaniel is going to be very selective about a head coaching job versus an offensive coordinator job. Now, Baltimore, that is a built-to-win now situation. Pittsburgh, the defense is built to win now. The offense, a lot of question marks, no quarterback answers there as of right now. So that's why Mike McDaniel is still in the hunt for some of these OC jobs. He's interviewed for the Lions job. Now he will interview for the Buccaneers job on Friday. Then another name that has come up, Nate Scheelhaase, is obviously one of those names. He's been mentioned on this show quite a few times. He was my favorite during the offensive coordinator search in 2025. He's getting interviews for head coaching jobs right now, which is interesting. One of those is Pittsburgh. I'm not sure that he's ready to make that leap since he has not been a coordinator in the NFL, but I get it. Everyone's looking for that bright, young, energetic coach that they can build a dynasty with and will be with the team for decades, especially a team like Pittsburgh. They've had one of the funniest stats I've ever seen is they are now looking for just their fourth head coach since the Beatles broke up. I mean, think about that for a minute. I'm not going to dive into Shieldhouse because you guys already know about him. You already like him. I'm looking for some names that are not as mainstream. And the one that really jumps out to me is Thomas Brown. Now, some of you may remember him from his playing days at Georgia, his brief stint in the NFL with the Falcons and the Browns, but I want to talk about him as a coach. In 2025, he was the Patriots pass game coordinator and tight ends coach. He is obviously still coaching since the Patriots are still in the playoffs. But before that, he was the Bears offensive coordinator and interim head coach in 2024. He was the Panthers offensive coordinator in 2023, and he worked with the Rams under Sean McVay to start his NFL coaching career in 2020, going from running backs coach to assistant head coach and tight ends coach. So you have a guy that comes from the McVay tree, which I know a lot of Bucs fans are looking for. He got to work with all the offensive geniuses that have come there since 2020, including Liam Cohen, and then went to Carolina as offensive coordinator under Frank Reich. That season was a disaster for the Panthers all around, but Brown was given play calling duties after an 0-6 start and ended up being named one of the top offensive coordinators in the league by the NFL Players Association. That was voted on, and these players said, look, this dude is the real deal. That took him to Chicago as their pass game coordinator under Matt Eberflus, and then promoted to offensive coordinator after Shane Waldron was fired mid-season. Then you had Eberflus fired during the season. Brown was named as interim head coach. The guy has the experience that you're looking for. He runs the kind of offense that you want to see the Buccaneers run, and has just been dealt some bad hands based on the coaches he was working for and the personnel that he was having to deal with. That was Bryce Young's rookie year in Carolina when he was there. So you have Bryce Young trying to adjust to the NFL while having some okay but not great weapons. Adam Thielen, DJ Chark, who absolutely fell off the face of the earth. Terrace Marshall Jr., Laviska Shenault. I mean, you had Chuba Hubbard and Miles Sanders as your running backs, so that was what you had to lean on offensively. Then you go to Chicago with, again, a rookie quarterback who looked like a deer in headlights week in and week out, and you had DeAndre Swift and you had DJ Moore, but that was really it. Keenan Allen was not good at all in Chicago. Rome Odunze was all over the place. You didn't know if he was going to be able to catch the ball that week or not. Very Marquez Valdez-Scantling of him, with kind of that Jekyll and Hyde performance throughout 2024. And then you had Cole Kmet as your tight end. There wasn't a whole lot to work with when Caleb Williams played like a rookie and missed a lot of easy passes. Now, don't get me wrong, Williams is still missing a lot of passes. Not as many, but he is not the reason that the Bears are still in the playoffs. That defense is the reason that the Bears are still in the playoffs. If the Bucs had that defense, they would be the Super Bowl favorites, 100%. So you take a look at the leap made by Drake May this season. Almost 4,400 yards, over 30 touchdowns, single-digit interceptions. He's been doing it with an old Stephon Diggs, Kayshon Boutte, Mac Hollins, and Demario Douglas. Mike Vrabel knows NFL talent, and he knows coaching talent. So Brown being the pass game coordinator under Josh McDaniel is not a coincidence. You know, Thomas Brown is not succeeding because he's there with with Josh McDaniel. He is succeeding because Mike Vrabel knew how good of a coach he was in the bad hands that he was being dealt. And that, to me, makes him a very intriguing option. It would be the first time since he was with the Rams that he got to work with a proven veteran quarterback if he came to Tampa, and probably the first time since the 2021 Rams where, you know, he would be part of a team that has that many legit weapons as he would have in Tampa. You mix a little McVay with a little McDaniel, and by that I mean Josh McDaniel, you know, on top of what Brown already tried to do in Carolina or Chicago while not really having the personnel to succeed with it, you could have the makings of a very dangerous offense with a young up-and-coming coach. Brown is only 39 years old. He'll be 40 in May. So this is a guy that not only is one of the brighter offensive minds in the game, but could be on his way to a head coaching career in the not so distant future. All the stuff that we're seeing about Nate Scheelhaus, I expect that kind of buzz about Thomas Brown within the next year or two. He was an interim head coach once already, and some team is going to give him the chance to be one for real. And so that's a name that I haven't heard a lot of buzz around. I think could be a really interesting fit for the Bucs in the direction that they're going in. Yes, he is a younger guy, but he does have that play calling experience that Todd Bowles is going to want, that Jason Light is going to want. And coming from the McVay tree, it's not going to be a drastic change in terms of offensive scheme compared to what Baker has done the last couple of years. The Bucs have interviewed a special teams coordinator for just the second time this offseason. That is coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs. Year, new systems. This is the time when a lot of us look at the messier parts of how we run our business and think there's got to be a better way. And there is. Streamlining your communications is one of the quickest upgrades that you can make. That's why today's episode is brought to you by Quo, spelled Quo, the smarter way to run your business communications. Because when your team is reachable, organized, and communicating in one place, you're not just working cleaner, you're creating more opportunities to connect with customers. I love how simple Quo makes everything. It works right from your phone or computer, and you can even keep your existing number. And Quo's smart AI tools automatically logs calls, summarizes conversations, and highlights next steps, so the details never slip through the cracks. It's no surprise that Quo is the #1 rated business phone system on G2, trusted by more than 90,000 businesses, from solo operators to growing teams. Make this the year where no opportunity and no customer slips away. Try Quo for free, plus get 20% off your first 6 months when you go to quo.com/lockedonnfl. That's QUO.com/lockedonnfl. Quo, no missed calls, no missed customers. As the new year gets going, a lot of people are trying to simplify their routines, and dinner is a big one. Between busy workdays, cold winter nights, and packed schedules, having an easy, reliable dinner plan makes a huge difference. That's where Home Chef comes in. Home Chef takes the stress out of cooking by delivering fresh, pre-portioned ingredients right to your door with easy-to-follow recipes that actually taste great. They're rated #1 by users of other meal kits for quality, convenience, value, taste, and recipe ease, and it's easy to see why. Home Chef was a game changer in my house. You get meals that come ready to fit your schedule. You got 30-minute recipes, oven-ready trays, quick lunches, with one of my kids running off to hockey, another one running off to basketball and guitar lessons. This has taken so much stress off of our shoulders when we're all having to operate on different schedules. For a limited time, Home Chef is offering my listeners 50% off your first box, free shipping, and free dessert for life. Just go to homechef.com/locked on. That's homechef.com/locked on for 50% off your first box, free shipping, and free dessert for life. Must be an active subscriber to receive free dessert. Wrapping things up here on today's episode of Locked On Bucs, and the Buccaneers did conduct an interview with Dolphins special teams coordinator Craig Aukerman for their special teams coordinator position. Now, Aukerman is looking for a new job because of the firing of Mike McDaniel in Miami, and for all we know, those two could just end up being reunited in Tampa. But the special teams coordinator isn't as important of a job to fill as the offensive coordinator is. So this is only the second interview that they have conducted for the job that we know of. It also seems like a more difficult position to fill, just because it's hard to find good guys that come available that have that experience that you're really looking for and that you really need. Most of them move on to be other types of coaches. Of course, famously, John Harbaugh is the exception here when he went from special teams coordinator to head coach. So this particular search might take a while. All of that said, Aukerman is a fantastic candidate. Greg Allman, shout out to the godfather of the Locked On Bucs podcast. He broke it down on Twitter with some of the key special team statistics for the Bucs and the Dolphins this past season, just to compare Thomas McGahee to Ackerman. So it is as follows. The Bucs were 21st in field goal percentage, which kind of surprised me given how good McLaughlin was for pretty much the entire year. But the Dolphins were 4th. Punt return average, the Bucs were 12th, the Dolphins were 7th. Kickoff return average, the Bucs were 27th, the Dolphins were 11th. Net punting, the Bucs were 27th, the Dolphins were 12th. Opponent punt return average, the Bucs were 10th, the Dolphins were 16th. So actually a win there for McGahee over Ackerman. Then we have opponent kick return average. The Bucs were 30th. The Dolphins were 23rd. Okay, so not great there on the kick coverage, but still much better than what the Bucs dealt with. I mean, I can tell you this, the Dolphins didn't think that they were better off kicking it through the end zone rather than trying to pin their opponents inside their own 25-yard line. Miami wasn't giving up the 35, after every single kick. With the special teams coordinator, you're just looking for someone that can figure out how to get players to be good in coverage and then not get your kicks and punts blocked. Like, that's it. That's all you need out of this. Chase McLaughlin is going to make his kicks if you block for him. Riley Dixon is going to pin teams deep if you block for him. The defense is going to perform better if you're not allowing the opposing offense to start on the 35-yard line every single time. We went over this after all of the firings. When you're giving up the 35-yard line, you're asking your defense to not give up 20 yards. Like, really, that's it. You're asking them to not give up 20 yards. Because if you give up 20, now the other team is automatically in field goal range. So your defense is playing from behind the entire time. So Thomas McGahee couldn't figure that out. Craig Ackerman clearly figured out most of it and has room for improvement with the rest. And for all we know, the Bucs have interviewed others. I think it's important to note that you do not have to disclose these interviews. There may be candidates for either of these jobs that the Bucs have already interviewed, and we just don't know about it yet. A lot of times it's the coach's representation that'll leak the information, especially if they're trying to create a more competitive market for their client. With the Bucs, they themselves have announced a lot of these interviews, that they've had for the offensive coordinator job after the interview has been completed. So it's not like every single candidate that they brought in or talked to on a virtual interview has been announced ahead of time. We'll see it pop up where the Bucs social media will say, we have completed a virtual interview with so-and-so. So just fair warning and disclaimer here that just because you haven't heard a coach linked to a team doesn't mean that there haven't been discussions or an interview, or at least an interview scheduled as of yet. It's simply not a requirement to make those announcements. Now, it is a requirement that you still have to ask for permission to interview coaches that are still employed with other teams, but those don't have to be made public. This isn't going to be a super long, drawn-out process. However, it's also not something that I expect the Bucs to have decided by the weekend or anything like that. I don't think that by Sunday the Bucs are announcing who their new offensive coordinator is. It's far more important that they find the right guy rather than just being the first one to hire a guy. There are going to be moves made that speed up the process for some of these coaching searches. Maybe the Bucs do end up missing out on someone. We've talked about Todd Monken a lot. The Bucs missed out on him because he chose the Ravens. You just don't know what these coaches are specifically looking for from a personnel standpoint, from a situational standpoint, and then, of course, their family standpoint. Where does their family want to be? Where do they not want to be? What's a situation that the entire family can be excited about? And I would argue that it's best that you do all of your due diligence and focus on speaking to as many legitimate candidates as possible so that you can make the most informed decision that you possibly can. At the end of the day, maybe the Bucs have Monken at the top of their list, but he decides to join John Harbaugh in New York, and he wants to go coach Jackson Dart and Cam Scatterbo and some of the offensive weapons that they have out there. And that's fine. He's not the only big fish out there. When I would get worried is if you see Monken take a job and now all of a sudden Mike McDaniel takes a job and then Zach Robinson takes a job and then Nate Scheelhaase takes a job and all these bigger fish start getting picked off before the Bucs make a move. That's when it'll be time to kind of worry. But with all that said, this might be a job that offensive coordinator candidates want more than the others. So they will actually wait for that Bucs domino to fall before they start accepting other opportunities with some of these other teams. Just be patient and trust that they'll get the right fit. That is going to do it for this episode. Please make sure that you are subscribed on YouTube as well as wherever you get your podcasts. If you're subscribing on YouTube, make sure you turn on those notifications so you know every time I go live, every time a new video drops. Follow on Twitter at Locked On Bucs, at Yarcho_Bucs, Instagram and TikTok at Locked On Bucs in both of those places. Become a member of the Everydayer Club. You can find that information at lockedonbucs.supercast.com or by clicking the link in the show notes. And if you want to support the show, but you don't want to be an Everydayer, it's pretty simple. Like this episode on YouTube, leave a 5-star review wherever you get podcasts. It does help other Buccaneers fans find the show. Hope you all have an absolutely outstanding day. Stay safe, stay healthy, fire the cannons. I want to thank you so much for joining me right here on Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.